Now, during this whole coronavirus pandemic, I found myself playing two games that I can't get enough of: Final Fantasy VII Remake and Persona 5 Royal. And what makes these two games my favorite games of 2020 so far is the fact that they're JRPGs. If it's something you want to ever know about me, is that I'm a huge fan of JRPGs. Any game that forces you to have to strategize against your opponent, or anything with like a mana system, or any game that's turn-based like a Pokemon, Final Fantasy, or even now Persona, hey, I'm a huge fan of it. So of course when I heard of these games, I was like, okay, let me get straight to it. Now, when playing both these games, I couldn't help but ask myself, which is better out of the two? Because this usually didn't even be a question at all. Like, before I even played Persona or even knew what Persona was, I was hooked on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, I played that game like twice already. I pretty much beat all the side missions. Like, Final Fantasy VII Remake is a fun ass game. It's one of those games that when I got done beating it, I felt lost. Like, I didn't know what the fuck to do with myself. So I had to go find me another JRPG to play. And when I went to GameStop, the employee recommended that I play Persona 5 Royal. Now, at first I heard of Persona, but I only heard about the arena games. I didn't know it was an actual game in of itself. So when he told me, hey, try out Persona 5 Royal, this is a JRPG. It's probably the best JRPG game of all time. As a matter of fact, it's probably one of the best games of all time. Now, when I heard that shit, I'm like, he's just capping. He's just obviously trying to sell me a video game. But I went and bought the game, and then, to be honest, even after I bought the game, I still ain't played for like another 2 weeks. I think I was playing Star Wars or some shit until eventually I started playing Final Fantasy VII Remake again. And then when I got tired of playing Final Fantasy VII Remake, I was like, alright, time for a new game. So I said, fuck it, why not play Persona 5 Royal? I only been blowing the damn game off for about like 2 weeks, and I don't want to waste the $65 that I ended up spending on it. So I went and played Persona 5 Royal, and this game turned out to be one of the best games I ever played in my life. And it's crazy because I've been blowing this game off for a whole 2 weeks. So for me to actually come play this game and realize I was missing out on some heat, it made me feel some type of way. Now, after beating the game twice with me on the verge of playing it for the third time, it had me asking myself, what game do you prefer? Do you prefer Final Fantasy VII Remake, or do you prefer Persona 5 Royal? And after doing a thorough investigation on both games, it turned out that I ended up liking Persona 5 Royal more than Final Fantasy VII Remake. And it's for multiple reasons. Now, it is some things that Final Fantasy VII Remake did do better than Persona 5 Royal, and I'm going to list those things as well. Now, first things first, let's start with the story. When it comes to Persona 5 Royal and Final Fantasy VII Remake story, I'll call both the stories average. But when it comes to Persona 5 Royal story, it adds a little bit more twist, and it has a little bit more shock value, more so than Final Fantasy VII Remake story. Final Fantasy VII Remake story is pretty much the same as the original, except they added some new things to it. One of them being that they got this thing called plot ghosts, where every time something is going to happen that might have affected the original story, the plot ghosts just intervene immediately. And then you got this other tab bit where Sephiroth and Aerith seems to be aware of future events that happened in the original Final Fantasy VII. So those are two new things that's in the remake that kind of gives the story a whole new, fresh look to it. But when it comes down to like actually playing the game, the story is more confusing than it is understandable. Especially at the end of the game. Like at the end of the game, it's a lot of people that don't know what the fuck is going on. As a Persona 5 Royal though, it's a story about a boy who's been wrongfully convicted over some shit he didn't do. So he was pretty much sent away to this guy named Sojiro Sakura's house, where he'll be staying there for 1 year until his probation is over with. Now within this whole year of probation, some wild shit happens, like him being able to go to other palaces and all this other shit, and he's able to get this ability called Persona. And with this ability, he uses it to go into other people's palaces. Pretty much another word of palace in the game is a person's ego, because they only do this to people that have fucked up intentions. Like say for instance, a gym teacher was accused of molesting one of the students or even abusing some of them, and he's seen the school as his castle because he was an Olympic volleyball player. So pretty much everybody in that school was kissing his ass. But it's this app on their phone where, you know, the app on the main character's phone that allows him to go into another dimension and see how that person sees that school. And so when he does that accidentally with this dude named Ryuji, they able to see that the gym teacher who's abusing all the kids and molesting all the girl students, They get to see that this gym teacher views the school as his castle because he can do whatever the fuck he want with it. And no one is aware of this except for them because they have the ability to go in the cognitive world and see how he views the other students as well as the school. And it's just not the gym teacher that does all this shit, right? Like, it's a shit ton of adults in the game that got fucked up egos, and you gotta pretty much change their whole look or change their whole moves so they'll be able to confess up to their sins. Like, you gotta take their hearts pretty much. You like take the shitty part out of them so that they can feel guilty for the things that they done. Now, throughout the game, while trying to make the shitty adults commit for their sins, you go through every now and then an interrogation where you find yourself in an interrogation room where you got to answer questions and shit about, you know, what led you up to this very moment in the game. Like, because in the beginning of the game, it starts off with you doing one last mission with the team until you found out that one of your team members ratted you out, and now you got caught, and now you're in the process of answering questions because you're in danger of going to jail for life. So throughout the game in the interrogation room, you gotta pick your answers carefully or you might end up getting a very shitty ending of the story. Now, like I said, I played both story modes and I ended up finding Persona 5 Royal story mode a little bit more interesting than Final Fantasy VII Remake story. Final Fantasy VII Remake story was a little bit too linear for me. It didn't have enough shocks and twists for me to actually say it's a better story than Persona 5 Royal. Persona 5, every time I played that game, I didn't know what to expect next. Like, every time I played that game, I always wanted to know what happened next in the story. That's what kept me playing, was the story. Especially when certain characters start to get involved with the story. Then it starts to become very Death Note-esque, because now you're over here thinking about who's the traitor in the group and who's doing certain things that, like, it's a game that fucks with your head a little bit. And it's always keeping you guessing every time you play it. Like, it has so much shock value and all this other shit. It just blows fucking Final Fantasy VII story out the water pretty much as far as content, shock value, and etc. As far as Final Fantasy VII characters, I'm not even gonna lie, man, when I first played the game, I fucking hated Cloud. Cloud had no personality and he came off a little bit too forced, like he was trying to be too badass. Like, even to the point where some of the characters in the game said, nigga, loosen up. But then you realize that, you know, throughout the game, he starts to open up to certain characters. Maybe a little bit too soon, because in the original game, he is a dick the whole way through until, you know, Tifa starts to help him realize who he is as a person, because he starts to realize he's just an experiment of soldier. As for the other characters, such as Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett, like, they're pretty cool characters. Like, they're lovable characters. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why Final Fantasy VII is one of the best games to many people is because of the characters. Like, this isn't the full game, and as the game, you know, releases the other parts of it, you'll start to understand why some of the other characters are beloved so much. But as a part 1 of the remake, you get to only really see Tifa, Aerith, Barrett, Cloud, Art, the red cat nigga, whatever the fuck, Red 13 or some shit like that. Like, those are really the characters that you get to see now. And to be honest, if I had to say who was the characters that really carried it for me, it was hands down Aerith and Barrett. Like, Aerith and Barrett was the life of the fucking party, in my opinion at least. When it comes to Persona 5 characters, I'm not even gonna lie, this might be a cakewalk for Persona, because the game literally evolves around you trying to get to know the characters. And the characters are good. Like, everyone has their own personality, everyone has their own backstory. It's a reason every time for you to talk to each person that they tell you to talk to. Like, you're just not talking to certain characters for no reason. Like, it's a benefit to it as well. The character depth in this game is so crazy to the point where you can have a motherfucking girlfriend on here. Like, the game has a system built around the progression of each character that you talk to and the connections that you built with each other, so that way you can unlock special moves and special items. You know, pretty much the game does a great job in getting the player to engage with the characters, and even the side characters are great. Like, it's just not the main cast. Like, the side characters are great and they engage them in the story as well. Now, when it comes to visuals, I might have to hands down give this one to Final Fantasy, because Final Fantasy VII is a beautiful game. One of the reasons why it was one of the most anticipated games to come out on PlayStation 4 was because of the visuals. Like, people wanted to see the transition from polygons to 3D, you know, Unreal Engine type shit. Like, that was exciting for a lot of Final Fantasy VII fans, including myself. especially the boss fights. Like, these visuals on these boss fights look fucking crazy. Like, it's one of my favorite parts in Final Fantasy VII. When it comes to Persona 5 visuals though, I mean, they're great, don't get me wrong, but I'm not gonna lie, when I first seen the trailer for Persona 5, I was kind of disinterested as the way that it looked. Like, some of the characters' eyes looked like they was like spaced too far apart, and it was like weird to me. But then as you play the game, you start to overlook a lot of that shit, especially the style and aesthetic of the game and the theme, how it's presented. You start to realize that this game has its own style to it. Like, it's a more groovy, smooth type of mood when you play this game, and it's very appreciated greatly. But when it comes to visuals, I'm gonna have to get an edge to Final Fantasy VII Remakes, because it's just a better looking game. Like, the game looks fucking amazing, even though it has some texture issues, you know, but that's besides the point. Persona 5 Royal, it has a great feel to it. Like, the visuals aren't bad at all. It's very colorful and poppy and very anime, and I like those things as well. But when it comes to just like, just look at Final Fantasy VII Remake, man, and just come back and talk to me about which one you think has the better visuals. Now, gameplay, this is another one I'm gonna have to give the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Only because I prefer games where you can run around and slash shit opposed to a turn-based game where you gotta wait for your turn to do some shit. Especially because the computer tends to have the opponent do like 3, 4, 5 combos before you get your shit off. And I'm just not a fan of that shit at all. Even though I don't mind turn-based at all, but I just can't stand that shit. It's one of my pet peeves when it comes to turn-based games. But when it comes to like a roam around free RPG type game, I fucking love it because it gives me the freedom to do whatever the fuck I want, and it doesn't really give the computer a chance to do some bullshit like do 3 moves on one turn and I gotta, like, no, it doesn't do any of that. Like, I could just run around, strategize with Barret, Tifa, Aerith, and I could just go and hack and slash and find a way to fuck this monster up. Now, when it comes to the music portion of both video games, I tend to prefer Persona 5 music more over Final Fantasy VII's music. Even though Final Fantasy VII's music is way more iconic than Persona's, I tend to prefer Persona 5's music because, I mean, it just plays better on my ears. Like, I enjoy it when it comes on. Now, it is one track from Final Fantasy VII that I do enjoy. It's called Airbuster. Like, if you listen to that track, that shit is crazy. Even Sephiroth's theme for the remake is crazy as well. But when it comes to Persona 5, I have at least 5 or 6 songs on my phone from that damn game. Like, them songs are really fucking good. And last but not least, the extras. In other words, side missions, new game plus, pretty much all the other shit you can do in a video game that has nothing to do with the story mode. Now, as much as I want to get this to Final Fantasy VII Remake because they got a specific part in the game where you can go ask this kid to fight all the summoning materia, and when you fight all the summoning materia, I tell you right now, it's some of the best shit ever in Final Fantasy VII Remake. Me personally, I had my funnest moments of playing Final Fantasy VII Remake fighting all the summoning materia. And it has a little Pokemon aspect to it because if you end up beating all the summoning materia, you can use the summoning materia in different parts of the game when you battle in different enemies, such as Sephiroth, the Airbuster, etc, etc. But when you compare it to other things in Final Fantasy VII Remake, such as New Game Plus and the side missions, I mean, it's kind of alright. Like, the side missions in Final Fantasy VII Remake was cool. The New Game Plus was cool. It's one of the reasons what made me want to play Final Fantasy VII again, because I get to pick and choose what part of the story I wanted to play again. I mean, like I said, Final Fantasy VII did a great job as far as the extras, as far as making me want to play the game again with the New Game Plus. The side missions was okay, but that one part in Final Fantasy we get to fight all the summoning materia, that was the best shit ever. Like, that right there will damn near solely win this shit over Persona. But when comparing it to Persona 5 Royals package with the New Game Plus and the Mementos and the side missions, it's pretty fucking crazy. With the Mementos, it makes grinding a lot more easier and smoother. As far as the side missions, they're fucking crazy. They got their own stories to them, such as one of the girls was getting their ass beat up by the husband, so now you gotta go find the husband and fuck up his ego so he can go apologize to his wife. And as far as like the other things, the New Game Plus, you being able to go get a fucking part-time job and fucking go on dates with your girl and shit like that, like, it's pretty much like you're living your own anime. Like, Persona 5 Royal is literally an anime simulator. Dead ass. Like, you're living your own anime. And then as far as New Game Plus, That's probably the best thing about all of this shit, because you get to carry everything over from your past gameplay except for your stats, right? Which makes the game process a lot more quicker and easier. If anything, Persona 5, the only thing bad about it is that it makes the game too easy by giving you so much shit. Like being able to carry all your other personas from your past gameplay to your new game plus, that's fucking crazy. Like also being able to have all your tools, your guns, all your items, like that really makes a person want to be like, okay, can I speed run this game? Like it makes people want to do multiple things like solo different bosses. It's just so much shit that New Game Plus gives you that makes you want to do so much other shit in Persona. And with that being said, I mean, everything concludes right now with Persona 5 being the more superior game, at least in my opinion. I went through all the categories as far as the story, the visuals, the gameplay, the characters, the extra shit, the music. Like I went through all that stuff and still Persona 5 came out as the more superior game in my opinion. Now, I am aware that Final Fantasy VII Remake is not a finished game, so part 2 or part 3 or part 4 could change this whole shit, you know what I'm saying? But hey, it is what it is. I'm only playing what I am given. But yeah, that's all I gotta say, man. Persona 5 is dead ass one of the best games, if not top 3 greatest games I ever played in my life. Like, real talk. But that's all I gotta say. I mean, hopefully you enjoyed the video. Like and subscribe. I very much appreciate it. It's your boy Trigger Senpai, and I'm out, man. Peace.